Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're breaking down the immense, highly complex, and frankly, heavily debated legacy of Mother Teresa's humanitarian work. We'll be using the rigorous socio-economic and ethical frameworks from our source text to really dig into what she did, exactly why she did it, and the very real criticisms her methods attracted. It's an absolutely fascinating study in applied ethics and global poverty, and we've got a lot of ground to cover. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The Crucible of Calcutta, 2. The Philosophy of Compassion, 3. Serving the Poorest, 4. Case Studies in Compassion, 5. Critiques and Controversies, and finally, 6. An Enduring Legacy. Let's get to it. Starting off with Section 1, The Crucible of Calcutta, and the post-WW2 context. Look, before we can truly understand her actions, we have to understand the environment she was operating in. The mid-20th century, right after the Second World War and following decolonization, was a time of profound global upheaval. Calcutta, in particular, basically became synonymous with extreme human suffering. Millions were living in squalor without basic sanitation, adequate housing, or access to healthcare. They were battling rampant, devastating diseases like cholera, tuberculosis, and leprosy. This newly independent nation was grappling with underdeveloped infrastructure, crazy rapid urbanization, and deeply entrenched social hierarchies. The social fabric was stretched so thin that many sick or disabled individuals were simply abandoned by their families. It was an environment entirely defined by systemic neglect. So her response to that environment wasn't just some overnight reaction. It was a deliberate, profound shift. In 1946, she experienced what she called her call within a call, a direct prompting to leave her comfortable teaching post and serve the absolute margins of society. This shifted her whole approach from addressing macro-level issues from afar to direct individual action. That call culminated in the founding of her globally recognized order, the Missionaries of Charity, in 1950, and the establishment of her famous Home for the Dying just 2 years later in 1952. Moving into Section 2, the Philosophy of Compassion, and the theoretical frameworks behind it all. Okay, this is crucial. Her work wasn't just your standard charity. It was a perfect textbook example of a concept known in applied ethics as the ethics of care. Unlike utilitarian frameworks, the ones that focus on maximizing overall outcomes or tackling abstract, large-scale principles, the ethics of care prioritizes direct, empathetic relationships with the suffering individual. It's all about personal presence. It's about taking responsibility for the person right in front of you, prioritizing human connection over broad institutional fixes. Mother Teresa herself grounded this abstract concept with a pretty blunt reality check. She stated, "If you love someone, you have to be able to do the dirty work." That quote beautifully encapsulates her commitment to hands-on, deeply personal support. She wasn't managing from a distant office corner. She was physically engaging with the sick and the dying, washing wounds and offering a comforting presence. And that is the ultimate, tangible manifestation of the ethics of care. Furthermore, her mission was a direct manifestation of another major framework, the preferential option for the poor. This is a powerful theological and social justice principle. Basically, it means viewing the suffering of the destitute not just as mere bad luck or unfortunate circumstance, but as a severe violation of fundamental human dignity that absolutely demands active intervention. For her, serving the marginalized wasn't just an option, it was a moral imperative that gave her work incredible urgency. All right, Section 3, Serving the Poorest, focusing on the Missionaries of Charity. Now, the sisters in her order were totally distinct because they actually took a unique fourth vow alongside the standard religious vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. This highly specific fourth vow was to give wholehearted and free service to the poorest of the poor. This distinctively separated their organization from other religious and secular charities by mandating absolute, unyielding solidarity with the most neglected and abandoned margins of society. It dictated a life of profound simplicity. So how did they actually execute that vow? Well, rather than relying on massive infrastructure projects or top-down economic development programs, their methodology was highly direct, localized, and simple. They tackled immediate human needs. This meant everything from running soup kitchens to address starvation and providing fast, agile disaster response to establishing orphanages for abandoned children and confronting the deep physical and social stigmas associated with leprosy. Let's look at Section 4, Case Studies in Compassion, to see this compassion in action. Nirmal Hriday, which translates to Home for the Pure Heart, easily stands out as her most emblematic institution.
Established in 1952, it directly challenged the prevailing societal instinct at the time to simply discard the terminally ill. Instead of leaving individuals to die alone on the streets of Calcutta, this facility offered a sanctuary. They provided basic hygiene, pain relief, and profound human respect in their final moments. It wasn't about curing the incurable, right? It was a radical act of compassion, asserting that every life has intrinsic value right up to the very last breath.
And you see the exact same thing with their approach to leprosy. It wasn't just a medical fix, it was deeply social. They actively combated the severe social ostracism attached to the disease by walking patients through a multi-step process. They started with direct physical care, medical treatment, and wound management, and then moved straight into economic empowerment through vocational training workshops. Ultimately, they aimed for complete social reintegration and independence. They fought both the physical disease and the devastating societal prejudice that came with it. Now we have to pivot to Section 5, Critiques and Controversies, exploring the academic discourse. Here is where things get complicated. A massive critique raised by scholars, development theorists, and commentators alike forces us to ask this. Did her methods solve poverty, or did they merely treat the symptoms? This forces us to critically evaluate the actual systemic effectiveness of her methodologies. Critics argue that by focusing so intensely on alleviating the immediate symptoms of poverty and comforting the dying, she might have inadvertently accepted the status quo rather than fighting to actually dismantle the entrenched root causes of that systemic poverty. There is a real core tension in her legacy. You have this intense debate between providing immediate, compassionate palliative care and symptom relief versus building robust, modern medical infrastructures that actively cure disease and change social structures. Some critics argue that her acceptance of dying individuals in her homes without pushing for the absolute highest levels of modern medical intervention or political change was a fundamentally flawed approach to true, long-term poverty alleviation. Commentators like Christopher Hitchens definitely didn't hold back, heavily scrutinizing her work across several specific fronts. First, they criticized the focus on suffering over systemic reform. Second, they questioned the quality of medical care, citing instances of poor hygiene standards and a lack of sophisticated medical resources in some facilities. Third, they raised concerns about potential religious proselytization, basically questioning if the inherently religious nature of the organization meant that charitable services were tied to Catholic conversion. And finally, there were major critiques regarding the financial transparency and management of the massive global donations the order received, pointing to a lack of stringent external financial oversight. These are significant, heavily debated points in the academic discourse that we absolutely have to acknowledge. Finally, Section 6, An Enduring Legacy and Her Global Impact. Even with those fierce methodological debates we just unpacked, the source material confirms that her legacy remains monumentally influential. She's a global symbol of unconditional love and selfless service. Her most profound contribution, arguably, was the restoration of fundamental human dignity to individuals who had been completely stripped of it by extreme poverty, illness, and abandonment. By treating every individual with respect, she affirmed their intrinsic worth. She inspired literally millions of humanitarian workers simply by proving the restorative power of refusing to look away from suffering. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. Is individual compassion enough to combat global poverty, or must it always be paired with systemic change? Does true humanitarianism require both the robust, systemic solutions her critics demanded and the raw, hands-on, dirty work compassion that she's so passionately embodied? It's a question that gets to the very heart of how we address global poverty today, and it proves just how enduring and relevant Mother Teresa's life story remains. Thanks for exploring this explainer with me. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.